Okay, so here we are. This is the second lecture, Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is on government. And I do have some articles, and I've got a video, and I've got just hopefully enough time to finish this chapter. We got lots to cover. Now, the first slide that goes along with this chapter is about market failure. And that's a lot what this video that I'm going to show you is about, and what these articles are about. The point here is not so much in do we have a market-based economy, a free market economy, or do we have an economy that is centrally controlled. That's too of a simplistic way of looking at this thing, okay? Because it's not a matter of one or the other. But the point that I'm Dimitri. The point that I'm making here is that, and the point that this video makes is that a totally free market system, a capitalistic free market system, ultimately will lead to the concentration of power. Now, that concentration of power may not be in government, but it would be in other sources, like it would be in corporations, big business. So the point here is that we don't have a choice between a totally free market system and a command system. I mean, that's not really our choice. If we want to maintain a healthy, growing economy with maximizing personal freedoms, the whole point here is that we need government regulation. But there's government regulations, and there are government regulations. Okay, there are ways that government can regulate that would protect business and would minimize our personal freedoms, and there are other regulations that would counter the power of big business and protect our freedom. The example of this I gave you last time is the Glass-Steagall Act. The Glass-Steagall Act, as you recall, was an act passed in 1932, and it separated commercial banks from investment banks, so that those that dealt with investment banks were not regulated by government, but those commercial banks that took on depositors' money, those banks were regulated by government. So that was a government regulation that was designed to protect the average person, okay, or to it helped enhance our personal freedom. So that was a good regulation. But it was a good regulation also because it allowed investment banks to deal with wealthy people without any form of regulation. And so there was an avenue here for wealthy people to do what they do. And if they lost a bunch of money, well, so what? Because it's their money. This is different than a commercial bank losing depositors' money, because that's not their money. But then in the year 2000, the Congress repealed the Glass-Steagall Act. So this is just one small example of government regulation versus, government policy versus government policy. There can be good policies where government is involved, and there can be, in terms of the individual, you and me, the middle class, there can be bad policies. And so we have to know the difference between the two. And along those lines, I have a couple articles here. One is from today's Wall Street Journal, and it says, "Chipping away at the IRS Stonewall, Internal Revenue Service." So here's another important point. When we talk about government, you can't look at government as being a single entity, because the government is made up of many different entities. There are many different departments. Like the IRS is a department of the U.S. government, okay? And what can happen here is that when you have different departments, each department can assume a certain amount of power onto itself. So it's not just a central authority, it's not just one person in the White House, it's not just the president, and it's not members of Congress either, but it's these individual agencies that can take on a power all of their own, like the IRS does. See, the IRS is almost has almost absolute power. It says here, there have been charges that the IRS has targeted citizens for their political views. You know, that's happened just recently. If you were of a different political view than those running the IRS, then the IRS has used their power to come against people who had simply differing opinions than they did. Now that's power. Y'all with me on this? I mean, it's power that is misused, and that's what this IRS is. This article is all about. And another agency that's really not part of government, but a lot of people think it is the Federal Reserve, our central bank. And this article says the bank that makes its own rules. This again is from the Wall Street Journal. And the Federal Reserve is a power unto itself. That in fact the president or Congress has very little, if any, authority over the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is a privately owned corporation. Okay, it's not a part of the government. And we talked. I'm not going to get in a big discussion of the Federal Reserve. We talked about it, in the past. But I want you to catch the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that when you talk about too much government power, you can't just look at the president or Congress, but you have to look at all these different departments within the government that has power onto themselves. Okay, well, that's exactly what this video is about. It's about 8 minutes here, and again, it's the same person as we listened to last time, Paul Craig Roberts, and he is talking about this very thing, about what kind of society do we live in? Because the kind of society we really live in may be different than your perception of what you think it is. It may not be what you think it is.
Well, Stephan, I think what I better do, the way you set it up, is to point out what it means in the title, Failure of Laissez-faire Capitalism, because it's easy to show this.
Oh, by the way, something I forgot to do, but there's some terms that he uses in here. He's talking about a book that he's written called The Failure of Laissez-faire Capitalism. And that's really the point. The failure of laissez-faire capitalism is that if we did have a free market system without government constraint, then that would lead to the concentration of power, most likely corporate power. All right. Some terms I meant to go over. Laissez-faire may be a new term to you. Laissez-faire is a French term that means leave alone or allow them to do. It means that it's the idea that we should have a free market system without any government interference. Okay, that would be strictly a laissez-faire situation. Another term that he's used here is quantitative easing. Now, y'all know what quantitative easing is now, right? I mean, we've talked about that a lot in the past. Quantitative easing is when the Federal Reserve creates money to buy bonds. Most of them may be government bonds, but they may be other, type of corporate bonds as well. But quantitative easing involves the creation of new money. That's the key behind quantitative easing. He also talks about the futures market. Now, I've talked about this before too. The futures market is the farmer, for example, who plants his corn in the spring but won't harvest the corn until the fall. So what does the farmer do? Well, he sells his corn in the spring before, when he's actually planting the corn, but he sells that corn to someone else at a certain price. That's called the target price. So that in the fall, the buyer will buy the corn at the agreed upon price. That's called the futures market. Okay? I've said in the past, in that situation, sometime the farmer wins and sometime he loses. Depends on what the market price of corn is in the fall. But farmers do it not so much in winning or losing, but giving more certainty to their situation. That at least they know for sure what they're going to be able to sell their corn for, and not be subject to the whims of the ups and downs of the market. That's the futures market. Free trade is the term used. Well, that's pretty obvious. Free trade is the idea that nations should trade amongst one another without any restrictions. And we have a whole chapter coming up here on just trade. So we talk a lot about when we should restrict trade and maybe when we should not. It's a whole subject. And I've already talked about deregulation. He talks a lot about deregulation. You see, what happened leading up to the financial collapse of 2007, like in later 1990s and early 2000s, we went through a period of deregulation where government was involved, say like with the Glass-Steagall Act. With the Glass-Steagall Act, that was regulation. The government regulated commercial banks. Well, what happened in 2000? Well, deregulation took place where the Congress said, well, we're not going to regulate commercial banks. See, that's called deregulation. Okay, so now hopefully you'll be able to understand a lot of what he says. So anyway,
I have a question.
Yeah.
During that same time period, there was a thing that was going on. It was called like the .com bubble burst or something like that.
Well, no, that was before. That's
Wasn't
something.
it like a crash and then like?
Well, that was previous. The crash I'm talking about was in 2007, but the bubble crash was about 10 years before that. Yeah. And that's different. I'm not going to go into all that.
Like a lot of companies were like at that point, like a lot of like startups like entered the market, like for like.
Yeah. With the bubble collapse, we had a lot of companies that people were throwing money at just anyone who had an idea in terms of the technology, and a lot of those ideas weren't good, and that's why we had a crash.
Only like some sort of like eBay or something like that.
Yeah, and those that did survive did quite well, of course. Most of them, Amazon and all those. Yeah. But anyway, let's listen to this Paul Craig Roberts, and he's talking about his book, The Failure of Laissez-Faire Capitalism. Okay.
Two main justifications for capitalism, laissez-faire or otherwise. One is that it ensures efficient use of resources, because capitalism shuts down loss-making enterprises. And a loss-making enterprise is one that's not using resources efficiently. So one of the claims for capitalism is that it protects valuable resources from being used in less valuable ways. And yet what we see as the consequence of deregulation of the financial sector is banks are too big to fail. They simply can't be allowed to fail because the deregulation allows them to become so monolithic that if even one of them fails, the belief is it takes down the entire economy. If all of the 5 or 6 big banks fail, then it's like a nuclear Armageddon or something. And so here we see the failure of laissez-faire in deregulating the banking system, because now the banks are bailed out and they're kept alive even though they failed. And they're kept alive at horrendous cost. First we had the TARP, what was it, $750 billion, was it, bailout from the taxpayer. And of course that was nowhere near enough. 750 billion was not enough, so the Federal Reserve had to bail them out by expanding its balance sheet from 800 or 900 billion to 4.5 trillion. So in order to bail out the banks, the supply of dollars had to be enormously increased. This, of course, brings pressure on the dollar, and so then they have to rig the dollar by having the Japanese central bank do quantitative easing, by having the European central bank do quantitative easing, so that everyone is printing money to match the dollars that were printed, so the dollar doesn't collapse in value. And so this sort of deregulation, see, now has spread its problems to the other 2 major currencies in the world. They've had to rig the gold market and the silver market, because if the gold and silver price rise, even though the dollar is not falling with regard to the exchange rate of the yen or the euro, it's another indication something's wrong. How come the dollar's losing value relative to bullion? And so they have to use the bullion banks, the agents of the Fed, in the futures market, gold and silver futures market, to artificially increase the supply of gold and silver by printing paper contracts that represent claims to gold, but are never settled in gold, always settled in cash. So they can dump huge quantities of paper representing claims on gold into the futures market, uncovered shorts, naked shorts, drive down the price, set off the stock loss orders of the hedge funds, step back in, cover their shorts, and everything is settled in cash. So everything is rigged. And of course, the Fed then has to rig the bond market. And it rigs the bond market by buying bonds until the interest rates are 0 or negative in real terms. And of course, it can't allow any significant stock market correction. So when stocks start to go down, they have to step in and buy S&P futures. So it's very easy to show that the consequence of deregulated banking system is all financial markets are rigged, currencies are rigged. And we now have banks that are so large that they can't be allowed to fail. And so we see the complete breakdown of capitalism. It cannot close down loss-making entities. Where else do we see the failure? We see it in the confusion of jobs offshoring with free trade. All the neoliberal economists, oh, this is free trade. They don't know the first thing about free trade. It has nothing to do with free trade. When you move jobs offshore, this is not free trade. A lot of libertarians fall into this because they think there should be no restraints on capital. A libertarian thinks that what free trade is that all the restraints are on labor unions. None are on capital. And so we have seen the move offshore of the bulk of the middle class jobs. And this has dismantled the ladders of upward mobility, and therefore there's no longer any mobility in society to speak of. But also, look, it has destroyed the justification for profits. Because the justification for profit is it's a sign that social welfare is being maximized. Yet, how is social welfare maximized? When the consequence is to shift offshore all the middle class jobs and stop the ladders of upward mobility. So this is not a justification. This is not maximizing social welfare. And so the second major justification for capitalism has also failed. So it's these two failures that the title in the book refers to. They are unambiguous. They're not debatable. We know this is both of these are facts.
So you're drafting a contract with your wireless carrier. Yes. But with US Cellular,
we know this is both of these are facts. And so here we see caution. This is caution about laissez-faire. You see, the people who were speaking to the French king, they were saying, look, we want the power, not you. Why should you have it? We'll have the power. And that's really what laissez-faire means. It means that activity moves from the public sector or the government into private hands. And this is the great failure of libertarians. They think that if power is in the public sector, always evil and bad, but if it's in the private sector, always good. But of course, what do we know about the exercise of power, whether it's public or private? And what do we know about power in our political system? Where is it really? It's not in the public sector. It's in the military security complex. It's in Wall Street. It's in the Israel lobby. It's in the extractive industries, mining, logging, oil. It's in agribusiness, Monsanto. So these are the people who buy the elections. Their campaign contributions control the government is their agent. And so the notion that somehow, if we could just move all the power out of the public sector and put it in the private sector, we would have freedom. That's absolutely not true. And so there has to be a balance. Some things have to be regulated to prevent the failures of capitalism.
And that's really the point that he's making. So let's see. Any questions about that? Okay, so this is let's get back to the slides then. Let's see that. Let's see. This is about where we ended up last time. Let's see, slideshow from current slide. And so what are externalities? Now, a lot of what we're talking about here is how a free market system fails. And because a free market system fails in some areas, then we have to modify the system in order to protect us from some of its failure. Now, the free market system succeeds highly in certain areas, but it fails in other areas, and that's what we're talking about here. Those areas that it fails in, and therefore we have to modify the system in order to correct some of the ills of the system. And the ills of the system can be an externality. There are negative externalities, for example. The pollution is a negative externality. An externality is something that was not intended for the primary purpose, but it was a byproduct of the process. Like pollution is the byproduct of the industrial process. So we love the cars that Detroit gives us, but we don't like the pollution that comes along with the cars, so we have to modify the system in order to protect us from the pollution. See, that's a market failure. Pollution is an example of a market failure, okay? So how does the government deal with externalities? Well, it taxes. It may what does it do with cigarettes? Well, it taxes cigarettes highly. Why? Because it views that as something negative. something harmful to people. So it tries to encourage more health by imposing high taxes on cigarettes, just an example. It subsidizes. There are automobile makers that come out with fuel-efficient cars. Electric cars are highly subsidized by the government. All kinds of activity is subsidized by the government. Activities that the government deems as beneficial. These are called subsidies, money paid to these entities. Of course, it regulates is another way, and it discourages negative externalities and encourages positive externalities. So what is the conflict? The conflict in this process of modifying the market is state versus federal government. What power or jurisdiction does states have as opposed to the federal government? See, that can be a conflict. Science versus politics can be a conflict. Social needs versus growth can certainly be a conflict. There are certain policies that would be very beneficial for growth, but those policies may lead to a gross uneven distribution of income. So we have, we have to wrangle with that. And favoritism, rent seeking. In other words, the government. You all know what rent seeking is by now, right? That's when like corporations, for example, put money into Washington, D.C. in order to influence legislation that will help that corporation. That's called rent seeking. And there's huge amounts of money that is poured into D.C. and then laws are passed, regulations are passed to satisfy, these requests by corporations. So what is the problem with lengthy and detailed laws? That's something else that we've been faced with. As government grows, and it has grown, so do many of the laws that the government passes. Laws are passed that run now thousands of pages. The healthcare laws, 2,700 pages long, and the regulations that go along with the healthcare law run for 22,000 pages. I mean, it's very, very complex. Now, what is the problem with these very lengthy and detailed laws? Well, I like to use an example here, an analogy, and that is, let's say that we had a law that said that no one could wear a tie. Now, that's a simple law.
But what if it's a beautiful tie?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's what I'm going to point out. And so, we all know what a tie is, and if someone is caught out in public wearing a tie, well, we know that he's violating the law, and it's very cut and dry. But if we went beyond that and we said, well, let's, what would happen if we had a law that banned beautiful ties? See, now that's a little more exact there. Well, the problem with that is who determines what beautiful is? See, once we get these lengthy and detailed laws, then it gives the lawmaker a great deal of power. Because, like, for example, if we have a law that says that no one can wear a beautiful tie, then those who are in power can declare, however they want, what beautiful is, and then prosecute people based on their view of what they think is beautiful. See what I mean? And so this is a problem with lengthy and detailed laws. What is the purpose of our present federal income tax system? Now, the point here is that almost all economists would agree that a flat tax would be the most efficient tax. Like if a flat tax would be like if we had everyone paid 5% of their income, whether you're rich or poor, whatever your income is, you take 5% of it and pay the federal government taxes. Now that would be a flat tax. Now we would never have a completely flat tax. I mean, you can modify a flat tax somewhat, but the idea is that everyone would pay the same percentage. But we don't have a simple tax system. We have a very complicated and lengthy income tax system. In fact, the basic income tax law is very simple, but what's made it so lengthy and complicated are all the exceptions to the initial law. And the exceptions run thousands and thousands of pages. Now, why do we have such a complicated income tax system? Well, the main reason is politics. See, it all involves rent seeking. See, when corporations come and they pour money into D.C. to influence legislation, then politicians amend the tax laws in order to meet that special need. Well, see, if we had a flat income tax system, what would happen to the practice of rent seeking? It wouldn't exist, right? So see, politicians will never go to a flat rate tax system, even though it makes sense economically. And because the income tax system that we have gives politicians power. See, they can amend the tax laws to meet this special need or that special need, or to meet the needs of this corporation or that corporation or whatever, or this special interest group or that special interest group. So it's really the whole purpose of our income tax system being so complicated is politics, period. It's not economics. Now, an interesting book on this matter is George Orwell's book, Animal Farm. I talk about this in the textbook, but the point that George Orwell makes in this very popular book of years ago is that centralized power leads to favoritism, whereby all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So in other words, there's a danger to think that if we have a centralized power, that those in power will be very benevolent and very wise and will make decisions that would be best for the average person, like the middle class. But that's not what history has taught us. What history has taught us is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And of course, what is our answer to the question of power in the United States? It's the Constitution. What's the purpose of the Constitution? The purpose of the Constitution is to make sure that power is decentralized. That, you know, this agency has this amount, this power, and then the second agency has this power, and the president has these powers, and the House of Representatives has these powers, and the Senate has these powers, and the states have these powers, and localities have these powers. You see, if power remains decentralized so that no one has a great deal of power, then that's how we maintain our personal freedom. But anything that leads to the centralization of power will ultimately lead to a loss of personal freedom. See, that's really been the basis of America from its very beginning. And the progressive movement, just some vocabulary really. The progressive movement is a popular movement amongst many politicians and others, but it advocates wealth distribution, to end conflict between the rich and the poor, limits big business, and segregates races. At least that's the official platform of the what is called the progressive movement. I just mention that because they are an influence in laws that are passed and things that happen. Would progressives be Austrians or Keynesians? And probably Keynesians, because it involves instead of society deciding amongst themselves what to do, the progressives have a plan, and then they try to impose that plan on society. Now, not even knowing what the plan is, or whether the plan is good or bad, that's a Keynesian way of looking at things. You know, we have a plan, and then we work the plan. Whereas Austrians are very suspicious of centralized planning. And they believe that power ought to remain more decentralized. So why is Social Security a Ponzi scheme? What is a Ponzi scheme, first of all? Let's say, I'll just give you an example. Let's say that I was a very convincing person, a very dynamic type person that I could, sell, snow to an Eskimo, that, sort of person, very good salesman. And through my charisma, I was able to convince you all that if you were to give me some money, that I could invest your money and I could give you a very generous return. I could make you a 20% return on your money, which would be fantastic. So because I'm very convincing, you all give me your money, and I convince other people that I could do the same. Now you all here in the classrooms, I give you a 20% return on your money. And you say, wow, this guy really knows what he's doing. This guy's amazing. But where did I get the money to pay you 20% return? Well, I got that money from new people that enter into the system. All right? And then those people, a Ponzi scheme will work as long as more and more people enter into the system. But once the system fails to grow, once you can't see, because none of this money was invested. With a Ponzi scheme, the leader doesn't really invest the money. What the person does is that he keeps a lot of it. He spends a lot of it. He buys big houses and big cars and takes trips around the world. So he's not investing this money, all right? But he's simply keeping the scheme going by being a convincing talker and getting more and more people to enter into the system. But once people lose confidence in that person, or for whatever reason, once there's the amount of people coming into the system drops off, then where's the money going to come from to give people? And there isn't any. At least there's not enough, and the system falters, and that's a typical Ponzi scheme. Well, that's Social Security. All right, that's Social Security. Social Security, say, take a good insurance company. Because Social Security is not insurance, but it works like an insurance. If there's an insurance company, and it takes money from people, when there's like an accident or a medical situation, what a good insurance company would do is take money from the return that it makes on its principal, but doesn't use the principal. In other words, what insurance companies do, a good insurance company, they'll bring in lots of money, they'll invest this money in the markets, and then when when claims are made, they'll take the money from their returns. It's kind of like an endowment. New River Community College has several endowments. What's an endowment? What that is that people will say, I'll give the college, $1 million, but for students, but none of that $1 million will ever be used for students. What's used to supplement student tuitions? Well, we take the $1 million, we invest it, and then any return that $1 million makes, that's what we give students to help them with their tuition. See what I mean? Now, an endowment is very secure because if the returns go down, well, the amount of money that we give students goes down. But the $1 million still, we never draw from the original $1 million. And this is what insurance companies do. They take in money, they invest it, and as long as they can, make good on the claims, pay money out when claims are made, but don't touch their principal, but only take the money from the return of the principal, then that's a very sound system. But is that the way Social Security works? No. Every dollar that the Social Security takes in, it goes out the next day. No money is ever invested. No money is ever saved. Therefore, Social Security is just like a Ponzi scheme. Because when the Social Security pays a claim, where does it get the money? Well, it's got to get the money from new people entering the system that pay Social Security taxes. You see what I mean? And Ponzi schemes have an ending. Well, that's a cheerful thought, isn't it? Since so much of the middle class is dependent on the Social Security. See, if you can glean a bit about what we're talking about here, is that the middle class in America is shrinking. All right? The very wealthy are becoming more wealthy, and those who are in the very poor class are growing in number, but the middle class is shrinking. And a few of the middle class are entering the very wealthy ranks, but the vast majority are going from middle class to poor. See, that's a big difference in the world I lived in when I was your age and you. When I was your age, the middle class was very strong. It was very large. Today, the middle class is becoming smaller and smaller all the time.
Didn't there's a bunch of millionaires in New York City, they decided, they wrote a letter to the mayor. They were like, hey, it was like people like the daughter to the Disney and Rockefeller sons or grandsons or whatever. They were like, hey, we want you to tax us. So they wanted to actually get these taxes because they said they wanted to help sort of build infrastructures.
Yeah, well, they're like Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest men in the world. I mean, he is officially, said that he ought to be taxed more. But if you really look into that, that's seldom the case. But there are, there's lots of wealthy people that have given away their wealth. John Gates, Bill Gates, Microsoft. He works full time, doing nothing but giving his money away. The Bill Gates Foundation gives millions and millions of dollars a month away, but he can't. No matter how hard he tries, he can't give all his money away. But he tries. He's put an enormous amount of money into Africa, trying to fight AIDS and things like that. I mean, it's in education and other things. Yeah, I mean, wealthy people, do give a lot of their money away, and a lot of them think, well, I'd rather give it away than give it to the government, and that's maybe a good way of looking at it. I can spend my money, I can give it away better than the government can give my money away. I think wealthy people have gotten a bad rap. I mean, there are some wealthy people that are selfish, but even those selfish wealthy people, you got to say, well, even if they don't give their money away, where is their money? Well, their money's not under a mattress somewhere. You know, their money is in banks that being lent out to other people. Their money is goes to building corporations and things like that. So, but see that the tragedy is not the fact that we have a small wealthy segment. The tragedy is that is that more and more middle class people are becoming poor, and that's the tragedy. That's what I think we ought to pay attention to. You know, I mean, when I graduated from college, there was an abundance of jobs for almost everybody. I mean, things, you know, it was a healthy, growing economy. And in today, you know, for you all, when you graduate, there are fewer jobs than there were, you know, several years ago. And it's not a temporary thing. It's you know, so many jobs have left America for reasons that, you know, we'll discuss in this course.
Couldn't you like work for the summer? Couldn't you have gotten a job? I mean, in your time, gotten a job over the summer, and it paid for like your tuition for the next semester?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I did that. I worked all my summers, and I mean, I did have to borrow money because I paid my own way through college, but not nearly to the extent, you know, that you do. I was able to pay off my loans pretty quick. And when I graduated, right away, I got a good job. And, you know, that's possible today. You know, there's lots of students that can get good jobs when they graduate. But in terms of numbers, there's not, you know, it's shrinking. That there's the middle class and the job opportunities, growth is shrinking. And that's what we're talking about in this course. You know, how come? How come this is so? Anyway, let's get back to the slides. I just talked about insurance. Why are unemployment benefits a good idea economically as well as socially? And I've talked about this before. You know, there's the social reason for giving unemployment benefits to people who are unemployed, but there's also the economic reason. And that is that we don't want large segments of the population simply quit spending money. So if one becomes unemployed, we give them money, and then they spend that money, and that helps prevent others from becoming unemployed. That's the idea. See, that's a wise use of a government program there. How does this differ from private insurance? And I just talked about this. Where am I going here? And how am I going? Why am I going backwards? See. Okay, what is Medicare? Provides health insurance to people 65 years or older and some disabled people. See, what we're talking about in this chapter is government, right? I mean, that's the topic of this chapter, government. So what we've been talking about here is government programs, some of the major government programs. Medicare provides health insurance to people 65 years and older and some disabled people. That's Medicare. See, no, what did I do? Let's see. Escape usually gets me out of things. And what is the difference between A and B? Part A and Part B of Medicare. Part A is hospital insurance and Part B is medical insurance. Okay, that's just part of the system. Now, what is Medicaid? Provides medical care for the poor. And what is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid? Medicare is insurance, Medicaid is an equity loan. There's a big difference. See, with Medicare, people pay taxes when they're working, and then that money that they pay goes to like an insurance, and then when they retire, they receive out of that insurance. But Medicaid doesn't work that way. See, people don't pay into Medicaid through their working years the way people pay into Medicare. And so the government looks at Medicaid as being a loan. It's an equity loan against your property. See, if you're on Medicaid and let's say the government gives you, maybe you're on it for 15, 20 years, and then you die, and maybe the government gave you $100,000, then they will sell all of your property until they get their $100,000. They'll repossess the car of your estate, your house, anything of value, and sell that to pay the government back the $100,000. See, Medicaid is an equity loan, period. It's not insurance.
So what are they gonna do if nobody has a house or a car?
Well, then that does happen. I mean, that's why people who get into this situation will often, there are rules involved in terms of the years and all, but they will, if they think they're going to die maybe in the next 5 years, instead of keeping their house or keeping their car, they'll sell their house and they'll sell their car. And if they can do that enough years, I don't know how many years, but if they do it maybe 5 years before they die, then they're okay. Because when they die, you can't take blood from a stone. If you don't, if you've been on Medicaid for several years and then you die and you don't have a house, you don't have a car, you don't have anything of value, well,
Don't they try and get it from family members?
Well, no, I don't think so.
I had to pay their phone bills that, like, you know what I mean?
Well, I don't think, no, it doesn't go down to the family. No, I know that. I mean, that's one thing that the government doesn't do. Of course, it could change its mind someday, but for now, it stops with the person. It doesn't go down to through the children and all that. But there's a lot of people that don't know the difference between Medicaid and Medicare in terms of how it's funded and the obligations involved. And what is Obamacare? Requires citizens to have qualifying health coverage and expands Medicaid. People without coverage will pay a tax. And this is something, a byproduct of the new health care law. In past years, this thing about Medicaid being a equity loan was not really a problem, because people who qualified for Medicaid were people that by and large didn't have any assets, okay? But one thing that the new health care law did is that it raised the bar for those who can receive Medicaid. And therefore today there are lots of people who are receiving Medicaid that do have assets, and those are the people that may be hurt, because that money does need to be paid back. All right. And what is an unfunded liability? Government commits itself to spending money on programs but does not provide adequate funding. See, this is something Congress loves to do. Congress loves to pass laws that would appeal to voters maybe, but they don't want to spend the money to support these programs. So what they do is they say, well, here's a law, but we'll make states pay for the program and not the federal government. See? And that's called an unfunded liability. When a political entity passes a law that requires funding but doesn't provide that funding, that's called an unfunded liability. And we have lots of laws that are passed that are not funded. Okay.
Can they pay for advertising for those programs?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Uh-oh, what did I do? Look at this. This is awful. Flat tax. Okay, I've talked about a flat tax. What is a value-added tax? A value-added tax is a tax on the purchase price of a good representing the value added along the supply chain. See, there are different ways to tax people. And the value-added tax is a very popular tax in Europe, and it's kind of like a sales tax, but a company goes into the woods and cuts down trees and then takes those trees to the sawmill. And the sawmill makes 2x4s out of the trees. Well, now that the wood is part of a 2x4, lumber, it has more value than when it was wood standing in a forest somewhere, right? I mean, if that weren't the case, why would we go to the woods and cut down the trees and make 2x4s out of them, right? Now, how much value has been added to the wood now that it's lumber instead of a tree standing in the forest? Well, however much value that is the amount that's taxed. And then we take the lumber and we build a house with the lumber. Now, the lumber has more value because it's part of the house than when it was just lumber sitting in Lowe's or someplace. You see what I mean? Well, how much value has been added to the lumber now that it's part of a house instead of just lumber sitting on the shelf somewhere? Well, however much value has been added, that's what's taxed. And so that's what's called a value-added tax, and it's very simplicity. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about this because, I mean, I don't know enough to go into detail if I wanted to, but all these taxes can be designed however authorities want to design them. So there is no one way of designing a value-added tax, just like there's no one way of designing an income tax, a progressive income tax system. And what is progressive income tax? A graduated income tax is a tax whereby taxpayers pay in accordance to their tax bracket after exemptions and deductions. And that's what our income tax system is. It's a progressive income tax system. For example, and I'm just taking these figures out of the top of my head, but let's say that between $10,000 income and $25,000 a year income, you're in the 10% tax bracket, all right? And over, let's say, $25,000, $35,000, you're in the 15% tax bracket. Now, did I say that right? 10% and then 15%, all right? 25,000 is kind of, over 25,000 is 15%. Your income is $26,000. Now, what's your taxes? Now, you want me to say it again? Under 20,000, you're in the 10% tax bracket. Over 20,000, you're in the 15% tax bracket.
Wait, what was it?
20. Did I say 25?
Yeah,
Let's say 25. Well, again, I'm taking this off the top of my head.
Yeah.
All right, 25,000, up to 25,000, you're in 10%. Over 25,000, you're in the 20%. Your income is $27,000. How do we figure your taxes? Well, the way we figure your taxes, see, you don't pay 20% on the whole amount. You pay 10% on the first 20,000, and then every dollar over 20,000, you pay the higher tax rate. You see, in our progressive income tax system, each dollar is taxed in accordance to what bracket that dollar falls in. So if we have 6 different tax brackets, then if you're a very wealthy person, let's say it's $20,000, is the first place where taxes increase. Well, if you're a very wealthy person, the amount of taxes you pay on your first 20,000 income is the same as someone who just makes 20,000. So I mean, so this is the way our tax system is. It's a progressive or a progressive income tax system. Every dollar, or another name for it is it's a marginal tax system, because the word margin means the last unit. So, every dollar is taxed based on the margin, meaning that what bracket does that last dollar fall in? and that's what that $1 is taxed. Okay. Marginal tax rate, the percentage of each additional dollar of income that goes to taxes. That's called the marginal tax rate. See, it's not the overall tax rate, but it's a tax rate for each bracket. Yeah.
So are you taxed like multiple times? So if you make $70,000, you're taxed on the first 20, and then everything over that, are you taxed again on the first 20?
Yeah, well, you see, that's a good question. See, when you do your taxes, or someone else does your taxes, you come up with certain taxable income. Now, I'll talk about this because I'm not getting ahead of myself, because this comes up in these slides, but there are exemptions and deductions. So if you're a single and you file, let's say each exemption is worth $2,000. So you're a single when you file. Well, let's say you make $30,000. Well, right away you're only taxed on $28,000 because you claim yourself, and that's an exemption, which is a takeaway from your income. So your income is different than your taxable income. Now, let's say you're married and you've got 3 children. So each is worth $2,000. So that would be 5 people, $2,000 apiece. You make $30,000. Right away, you take away $10,000. You're taxed on $20,000. See, these are exemptions. Now, in addition to this, you have deductions. Deductions like when you give money to a church, for example, you can, if you give $1,000 to a church or some other charitable organization, you can use that on your taxes as a deduction that lower your income. See, and so with deductions and exemptions, your gross income goes down. From there, we get down to your taxable income, and that's what you're taxed on. Now, when you do your taxes, you say, okay, this is my taxable income, and so according to this table, this is how much money I owe in taxes. But what you don't realize is that figure in that table that you're looking at was really calculated by the marginal tax brackets. See, I mean, you don't have to do that. You don't have to say, well, so much my income was in this tax bracket and so much my income was in that tax bracket. See, but that's what's behind the scenes. See, that's done for you. That's how these figures are derived. Does that help answer your question? And oh nuts! What am I doing? See. Okay. How does our income tax work? Exemptions. Okay. Deductions. See, this is my next slide. Oh, and everyone has a standard deduction, which says that there's a standard deduction that's worth X number of dollars. And after your exemptions and deductions, you figure your taxes, and let's say that the standard deduction is $10,000, and you figure out your taxes, and you don't come up with $10,000 takeaway, deductions. Maybe you come up with $7,000 deductions. Well, what you can do is you don't have to take the $7,000, you take the $10,000 deduction, as a takeaway from your income, because that's a standard deduction. Everyone gets a standard deduction. Now, if you calculate all your deductions and they add up to more than $10,000, more than the standard deduction, then you would fill out the long form instead of the short form, and then you would claim those deductions. So, let's say that you got $15,000 in total deductions. Well, you don't take the standard deduction of $10,000. You itemize your income taxes, and you claim the higher deduction. See what I mean? And that's the way the system works. So actually, most people who file taxes only qualify for the standard deduction, and only you know, I don't know how many, I've got no idea, but I know it's a minority of taxpayers, you know, go through the bother of itemizing and claiming a deduction that is higher than the standard deduction. Okay? I won't go to we're running out of time here, so what is alternative minimum tax? An AMT tax is parallel tax system aimed at wealthy individuals, limited deductions. The alternative minimum tax system is that name is really confusing because it only applies to very wealthy people. Well, actually, it used to apply to very wealthy people. Nowadays, you don't have to be that wealthy to qualify. But it's a parallel tax system where if your income is beyond, if your taxable income is beyond a certain point, or it may not even be your taxable income, it may just be your income. I'm not even sure, but if your income is beyond a certain point, then all the rules change. You know, in terms of these deductions and exemptions and things like that, it's just a whole different system. You know, it's a parallel tax system, and the whole purpose of it is to extract more money from wealthy people, more tax money. Tax incidence, a distribution of tax burden among taxpayers is what we mean by tax incidence. Now, what is the ability to pay principle of taxation? Those with greater ability to pay should pay more tax. That's the way our income tax system works. The more your income is, then the higher tax bracket you can be put in, and therefore, not only do you pay more in taxes money-wise, but you pay more proportionately. You know, as a percent of your income, you pay more. See, that's the way our tax system works. Okay, those with greater ability to pay should pay more tax. Well, you know, that's why our tax system is progressive, because it's based on the ability to pay principle. So what is the benefits received principle of taxation? Those who receive more benefits from government programs funded by a tax should pay more tax. This is an example of a gasoline tax. You know, those who benefit the most from roads pay the most. Well, who benefits the most? Those who buy most of the gas. See? So our tax on gas is totally different. The principle is totally different than our tax on income. See? Our income tax is based on the ability to pay principle, and the gas tax is based on the benefits principle. See, there's two different principles. A regressive tax is a tax, a percentage of income decreases as income increases. The best example I can give of regressive tax is a tax on food. See, when you and I go shopping here in Virginia, we pay a tax on food. Like we go to Kroger's, how much money you buy, there's a tax on that, correct? Now, if we lived in Michigan, if you went to Kroger's and you bought $100 worth of food, it's $100. There's no tax on it. Why? Because the legislature in Michigan and some other states have said that tax on food is a very regressive tax because it hurts the poor and hardly affects the wealthy. See, that's a regressive tax. Those who are least able to pay the most, and those who are best able to pay the least, with a regressive tax. See, the reason is that you take a poor person and a wealthy person. Now, in terms of quantity of food, they both may eat the same. Now, you know, the wealthy person may eat more steak and the poor person more hot dogs, but the wealthy person doesn't. You don't eat more based on your income, you know, or all wealthy people would be very fat. So the point I'm making is that if you go to the store and buy food, and there's let's say a 10% tax on that food, and the poor pay the same as the wealthy, the same 10%, who's it hurting the most, the wealthy or the poor? Well, that 10% to the poor person is a whole lot of money based on their income. That 10% to the wealthy person it can't even be measured. So a tax on food falls puts more burden on the poor and less on the wealthy. Okay? And that's why states like Michigan have eliminated the regressive tax, like tax on food, and gotten tax revenues more from progressive taxes, which tax the wealthy proportionally more than the poor. Does that make sense? Monopoly, a sole producer of a product for which there are no good substitutes. And how does government promote competition? Antitrust laws try to promote competition by prohibiting collusion, which is the cooperation amongst like corporations, and other anti-competitive practices. And I've talked about this before. Have we exercised our antitrust laws over the past 10 to 20 years? And no, we have not. You know, before 20 years ago, you know, like during the 50s and 60s, if there was too much economic concentration, then the government would say, well, you have to split up, you have to instead of becoming one big company, you gotta become more, you know, several small companies, because the consumer needs competition so the consumer can be protected from too much market power. But today, in today's world, instead of being suspicious of market power, our government policies have actually embraced economic concentration. Okay, and one of the reasons is that who can be involved in rent seeking better, several small companies or one big company? I mean, you know, which situation are they going to give more to Washington D.C.? The big company, right? You know, if you got a bunch of little companies, well, each company doesn't have much clout. But if you got one big company, they can pour a lot of money into D.C. and get laws passed that will favor them. So government wants big corporations because that's where they get all this money.
What's an example of an antitrust law?
Well, we
Is there a specific act?
in the oil business, Standard Oil, for example, was forced to divest itself of, you know, become several different companies at one time. The antitrust laws, see, a trust. In the late 1800s, we had a lot of trusts. You know, there was the sugar trust, there was the oil trust, there was this trust, and what a trust, railroad trust, and what a trust is that these companies don't become one company, but they collude, they cooperate, and act as if they were a monopoly. And that's what a trust does. So an antitrust policy is against trust. You know, it's against that cooperation, economic concentration. And so the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890, and it was an act that favored more competition, but the, you know, that video that we saw last time, you know, talked about, you know, the Sherman Antitrust Act as being a dead letter law, that it's on the books, but we don't exercise it anymore. Yeah.
So a trust is a collection of companies working together
Yeah.
to be like a big corporation.
Right.
But now we just have one big corporation, so does that even apply?
Well, yeah. I mean, the Sherman Antitrust Act, I mean, it's, you know, the word trust is there, but the Sherman Antitrust Act is against too much economic concentration. I mean, that's really the point. You know, we don't want one entity controlling the market, because then the consumer is put at a great disadvantage. And we've already talked about what a natural monopoly is, so I won't go into that. You know, I talked about the power companies being a natural monopoly earlier. Can a natural monopoly take advantage of its exclusive market? No, it's regulated by government. I've talked about this. How does government promote full employment, price stability, and growth? By using monetary and fiscal policies. Monetary policies of the Federal Reserve. Fiscal policies of the federal government. And what is a fiscal policy? The use of government to influence aggregate economic activity through taxing and spending. And monetary policy are policies of the Federal Reserve, And that's the end. I got through this. So see, in the next chapter, we're talking about government again, but not in the way we talked about it in this chapter. In the next chapter, we talk about government only in terms of fiscal policies. What tools does the federal government have to influence economic activity? So it's a completely different way of looking at government in the next chapter. But anyway, read next chapter, before the next lecture, and I'll see you next time.